will come to order. And I want to thank the witnesses for attending today, thank my colleague, Senator Johnson, in participating in the invitation to you and the collaborative approach to this hearing and our inquiry, and to all of our staff for their hard work on the memorandum that we've distributed with documents, which I will put into the record without objection. Today's hearing is about much more than the game of golf. It's about how a brutal, repressive regime can buy influence, indeed even take over a cherished American institution to cleanse its public image. It's a regime that has reportedly killed journalists, jailed and tortured dissidents, fostered the war in Yemen, and supported other terrorist activities, including the 9/11 attack on our nation. Today is about sports washing. It's also about hypocrisy, how vast sums of money can induce individuals and institutions to betray their own values and supporters, or perhaps reveal a lack of values from the beginning. It's about other sports and institutions that could fall prey if their leaders let it be all about the money. Perhaps to state the obvious, sports are central to our culture and society. They have huge implications for our way of life, our local economies and communities, close to home, and our image abroad. Athletes like the PGA Tour golf players are role models. They are ambassadors of our values, and the institutions that concern us today are vital to our national interest. To have them taken over by a repressive foreign regime certainly is a matter of our national security. So we hope that today's hearing will help us uncover not only the reasons for the PGA Tour's sudden reversal of its opposition to the LIV Golf takeover and what it means to golf, but also to understand what similar investments by repressive regimes or other countries with deep pockets could mean for our country, for our national security, and for the world. For 2 years, the most vehement opposition to the Saudi government's taking over the sport of golf in America, and the most vehement criticisms of Saudi sports washing came from the PGA Tour leaders themselves. They enlisted fans, sponsors, the 9/11 family, members of Congress like myself. Some of those leaders sat across from me in Cromwell, Connecticut, and asked me to support them, and I did. All on the promise and commitment to maintaining the PGA Tour as an independent, cherished, iconic American institution. And Jay Monahan himself said in June, just a year before June 6th, I would ask any player that has left or any player that would ever consider leaving, have you ever had to apologize for being a member of the PGA Tour? The players admirably and heroically stood by the PGA Tour and said no to tens of millions of dollars. Likewise, members of the 9/11 families who are with us today stood by the PGA Tour, and others of us did the same. And then suddenly on June 6th, everything changed. The sports world was shocked by the announcement that the PGA Tour was entering into an agreement to combine forces with the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, which owns LIV Golf. It's an instrument of the Saudi government. And the deal was not to just take over a team, but the entire sport, not just an individual Saudi investor, but the government of Saudi Arabia. So it was no ordinary investment. The Saudi Public Investment Fund, known as PIF, is closely allied with the very top of the Saudi monarchy, and it is headed by Governor Al-Rumayyan, who was a negotiator and party to this deal. So, understandably, there was a feeling of betrayal among many of the individuals and groups that supported the PGA Tour, including from the players themselves. And we're here today because not only did it raise that feeling of betrayal, and John Rahm, familiar to all of us, said it best. I think the general feeling is that a lot of people feel a bit of betrayal from management. But we're here about questions that go to the core of what the future of this sport and other sports will be in the United States. What happened that led the PGA Tour to change its position? Was it only the hope of ending litigation? Or was it also the unspecified in amount Saudi investment that would come of it? Just how much money did PIF offer the PGA Tour? And what other sources of money were sought as an alternative? Given these questions and their implications, not only for the future of professional sports, but for foreign influence and global human rights, this subcommittee launched an inquiry into this deal. And I've already put into the record the memorandum that we circulated that incorporates the documents that have been produced and some of what we've learned. But clearly, although the agreement itself is seemingly unspecific, vacuous, and simply an agreement to agree, we know from it that the Saudi government will have an equity dominance and ownership of this institution through its investment. And we know also that the PGA Tour surrendered once for the Saudi investment of money, and there is no assurance in this agreement that it would not do so again. We've learned from the documents some facts that also indicate that the PGA Tour will be dominated in this agreement. We learned that after rebuffing the PIF as recently as January, the PGA Tour representative reached out to PIF Governor Yasir Al-Rumayyan days after he was told of fears that, quote, the Saudis will double down on their investment, end quote, in LIV. We learned that Saudi Arabia's early vision for the tour included a team golf tournament culminating in Saudi Arabia, at least one high-profile PGA event in Saudi Arabia, and a global golf investment fund managed by the PIF. We learned that just one night before the framework agreement between the PIF and the PGA Tour was signed, the PIF added a non-disparagement clause that appears to prevent the PGA Tour from criticizing Saudi Arabia and applies to the witnesses that are before us, apparently, today. We learned that Governor Al-Rumayyan will not only become the chairman of the PGA Tour's board, but he will sit on the executive committee of the new company that is to be formed, where he will, and this is a direct quote from a document we received, quote, provide PIF with strong influence over the new company. And we learned what is not in the agreement, which may be as important as what is explicitly there. Very little is explicit, that there are potential side agreements and understanding. Only in the internal documents reviewed by this committee did we learn that PGA Tour officials prepared a side agreement providing that LIV CEO Greg Norman would be terminated upon execution of the final agreement. We don't know whether this agreement was executed, but there are other documents, such as the talking points that are now in the record for Jay Monahan to talk to the policy board, that indicate the parties maintained this understanding about terminating Norman after the agreement was announced. We still don't know whether there are other side agreements or other understandings that may exist, or what they might say. We don't know what assets the PGA Tour will place in the new entity, or how it will maintain its nonprofit status, certainly a profoundly important question. What assets it gained while it had nonprofit status that may be transferred now to a for-profit entity, raising very serious questions that ought to concern this committee and the Congress. And especially since it has indicated that there will be an active commercial role for this new entity. We also don't know what will happen to players who may want to speak out against Saudi Arabia's human rights abuses. They apparently are bound by the non-disparagement clause. The LIV Golf tournament had requirements about wearing apparel. Are they going to have Saudi insignia on their shirts? Are they going to be speaking on behalf of the Saudi government? And we don't know whether LIV will continue to exist after the conclusion of its next season. And if so, what form or under what leadership? And of course, we still don't know how much money is on the table or was even discussed to prompt the PGA Tour to make this sudden dramatic reversal. My hope is that this hearing will begin answering those questions, and that we will learn more as we receive additional documents and have additional hearings. Americans very simply deserve to know what this agreement means for the future of golf, as well as for the future of the Saudi Arabian government's investment in sports and other autocratic regimes that may choose to do the same. Because Saudi Arabia has nearly limitless capacity to inject its funds into these endeavors through its nearly $700 billion in assets. And we already know that they have purchased a British Premier League soccer team, two of the largest video game tournament operators in the world, and made investments in Formula One racing, among many other investments. Now, we won't be able to comprehensively address these questions because two witnesses whom we invited couldn't be here today. They had scheduling conflicts. We're working with them to resolve those scheduling issues, and we hope that they will work with us cooperatively. The PGA Tour Chief Operating Officer Ron Price and board member Jimmy Dunn, who are with us today, played a central role in arranging the agreement, and I want to thank each of you for being here. You are both knowledgeable and prominent members of the PGA Tour's leadership. We hope that you will help us to discover some of the reasons for the PGA Tour's sudden reversal and other answers to these questions, and what the deep pockets of the Saudi government and other regimes could mean to the future of our country and the world. And with that, I will turn to the ranking member for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to welcome the witnesses and thank you for appearing voluntarily before our subcommittee. Let me start by saying I love the game of golf. I enjoy playing it. I wish I was a whole lot better, and I enjoy watching it. Golf is a pure meritocracy. golfers succeed or fail on their own. Every golfer can empathize with a pro who is trying to hold on to a one-shot lead, execute a difficult shot, or sink a crucial putt. We appreciate the moments of celebration, and we sympathize with the failed attempts. The game of golf has developed a handicap system that allows golfers like me at a lower skill level to enjoy competing with one another. But it is the competition at the highest level that brings us here today. Every professional sport faces the exact same challenges. How do you structure and maintain competition to attract large audiences and maximize the revenue base? How do you fairly compensate all the athletes, from the top stars to the journeyman players striving for the top? And in a global environment, how do you accomplish this with entities possessing dramatically unequal resources? League sports in America provide a good example of this dilemma. How can small city markets like Green Bay or Milwaukee afford to field teams to effectively compete against cities like New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles that have much larger fan bases? The solution has been the formation of leagues and governing bodies that develop and enforce the rules of the game and competition. Unfortunately, many of the rules and practices that these leagues engage in may run afoul of the Sherman and Clayton antitrust laws. In researching the legislative and judicial history of sports in America, I must agree with the assertion of a 1987 University of Miami Law Review article that states, quote, "The precise law governing the relationship between professional sports leagues and the Sherman Act is so noticeably confused and unsettled. A simple explanation for this confusion is that it is difficult to write a law that effectively addresses every situation and every reality." This hearing deals specifically with the reality the PGA Tour faced when Saudi Arabia decided to get involved and invest in professional golf. According to its 2021 990 tax form, the PGA Tour has net assets worth approximately $1.25 billion. Saudi Arabia's public investment fund is estimated to be worth between $600 and $700 billion, 500 times larger than the PGA Tour. Until the creation of LIV Golf, the multiple golf tours throughout the world competed in a commercial marketplace dictated by the normal market force of profit and loss. LIV is financed by an entity that was committed to competing for top players with little, if any, regard or expectation of a direct financial return. From a commercial standpoint, it's not a fair fight, and the PGA Tour accurately viewed the LIV as an existential threat. Now, I have the deepest sympathy for the families of 9/11 and support their efforts of obtaining information currently being withheld by the U.S. and Saudi governments. And Mr. Chairman, as a quick aside, I was approached by some members of 9/11 families of the hall today, and they gave me a document that summarizes, I guess, the FBI's investigation of Saudi involvement in 9/11. And unlike so many, or like so many documents that I receive, it's heavily redacted. The FBI, the United States government, the Saudi government is not being transparent with the 9/11 families. And I want to completely support the 9/11 families in obtaining transparency and the truth. So I'd like to enter this document into the record so that people can view for themselves the lack of transparency of our government and the Saudi government.
Without objection, and I might just say I have spoken to the 9/11 families about exactly this resistance by our own government, the FBI, and other agencies to provide the facts that are necessary for them to seek simple justice, and I would join you in a bipartisan effort to make those facts more available.
And hopefully that's a really good bipartisan result of this hearing. Sports washing is also a legitimate issue, but no amount of money can wash away the stain of the brutal Khashoggi assassination and other human rights abuses. But it would be grossly unfair to expect the PGA Tour to bear the full burden of holding Saudi Arabia accountable. After all, anyone who drives a car or uses oil-based products has helped fill the coffers of the Saudi Public Investment Fund. Foreign investment in the U.S. is generally a good thing, and I'd rather have the Saudis reinvest their oil wealth in America as opposed to China or Russia. Also, if the kingdom's involvement in golf and other sports helps it to modernize and offer more rights to women, wouldn't that be a good thing? Although I believe there are many more pressing issues Congress and this subcommittee should be focusing on, like many Americans, I have a great deal of interest in how this issue is resolved. As courts have indicated, Congress does have a legitimate role to play in settling the confusion in the law governing professional sports. That said, I did not sign the request for information or the memo issued by the majority because the parties are in the midst of what should be a private negotiation, and there's no deal to review. Inquiries and investigations conducted by this subcommittee generally involve some measure of wrongdoing. There's nothing wrong with the PGA Tour negotiating its survival. Negotiations are often delicate, mostly private, and I fear Congress getting involved at this stage could have negative consequences. But I hope this hearing can be constructive and address the many legitimate questions the public has regarding the future of golf and how to preserve the purity of competition at the highest levels of the game. Although the various parties in this dispute bring different perspectives and objectives to it, my guess is they do share a common love and respect for the game of golf and want to see it succeed well into the future. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I thank the witnesses and look forward to your testimony.
Thanks very much, Ranking Member Johnson. I'm going to introduce the witnesses and then, as is our custom, swear you in and ask you to speak. We're going to have 7-minute round questions once your testimony is done. We welcome Ron Price, who's the Chief Operating Officer at the PGA Tour. He has been leading the tour's operations during the absence of CEO Jay Monahan. By the way, both of you, I hope, will convey to Mr. Monahan our hope for his continuing recovery. We're glad to learn that he'll be back later this month in the job, but in the meantime, you are representing the PGA Tour. Mr. Price has been responsible for the overall strategy and operations of the PGA Tour, including overseeing championship management, brand communications, golf course properties, finance, legal licensing, and merchandising, as well as talent and culture, board governance, and government relations. My understanding is you joined the tour in 1994.
Yes, sir.
Jimmy Dunn, who is sometimes referred to as a legendary deal maker, served as a member of the PGA Tour Policy Board since January of this year, and he is one of the chief architects of the PGA